Hey everybody, so this is the part 2 of my Heidegger video, and I decided to do it in a different format. So I'm going to do my interpretation and my understanding because it's hard to do Heidegger as such without like a 10-part series of hour and a half long episodes. So I'm going to just be trying to teach how I think of Heidegger in my head, and I would really like. I'm gonna ask my professor to look over it, or listen to it and let me know where I'm wrong and what's good and what's bad, and also leave it in the comments if you know more about Heidegger, if you notice something that I got wrong. Like I said, I've I was totally immersed in Heidegger's philosophy for about 2 years in undergrad, and that's it. And then I've since then been focusing, like since I graduated, I've been reading just the previous existentialists, so Kierkegaard, Nietzsche. Well, I read Nietzsche enough in undergrad, so Kierkegaard, trying to understand those ones, the really hard ones, and Kant, but man, they're hard. So Heidegger's hard too. And I realized in the first video, like, why he's confusing. I'll summarize it. Heidegger is confusing because he thinks of the world completely differently and orders things completely differently. And so I wanted to draw. This is Google Drawings. And what I'm going to be doing is drawing Heidegger's philosophy as I understand it. And I want to make it clear, too. In my head, Heidegger's Aristotle and Heidegger are kind of like blended together because Heidegger's interpretation of Aristotle is so unlike anyone else's that it's kind of like, what's Heidegger's philosophy and what's Aristotle's philosophy? I think that most of Heidegger's philosophy was his own interpretation of Aristotle. Just like most of my philosophy is my own interpretation of Martin Heidegger. So I'm going to be talking about my philosophy here, and also the way I understand Heidegger's and where he differs. And yeah, so I will start. I'm going to be drawing the hierarchy. Because the reason why Heidegger is confusing is because he comes at things from a different direction, and you really need to understand that that's very literal and pure. Like, he really does come at things from a different direction. So I'm gonna start drawing here, okay? And I've talked to Jasmine. Jasmine, you know the whole they self versus your inner self or your real self.
Can you give me a refresher?
So your they self in Heidegger's language, for example, is the presentation of yourself that you give to the outside world and the way that you interact with that world. So your they self is basically your public image, if you will. But that includes everything that is not your very innermost thoughts, right? So like your own dreams and stuff, those are yours. But your they self is not yours because it depends on two things. It depends on how you act, and it depends on how others interpret your behavior. So if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can end up crucified even if you were a decent guy. So your they self has to do with society and then also your own actions. It's both.
Okay. What's the other one?
Your inner self is just your real self. Okay. And I'm going to go into what your real self is. Your authentic self in Heidegger's language. So, in my opinion, and the reason why I like Heidegger's philosophy is because I'll just do text boxes for now. Every single thing in his philosophy comes from what I call the mystery of being. He just calls it being. So being and time is his like magnum opus of his earlier philosophy. And then he wrote poetry in his later life because he realized poetry is kind of better at getting his point across, but he sucked at it. So So the treatise format of the philosophical treatise format over the poem is what we're looking at because that's what Heidegger was better at. So, what is the mystery of being? I will draw like maybe like side things that are like renaming it. So it's something rather than nothing. Why does anything exist at all? What exists versus does not exist? What does that even mean? These are the central questions that define Heidegger's philosophy. I don't know why it's not letting me shrink this. There you go. So, does this make sense, Jasmine?
Yeah, it's just a different way to say the concept.
Yeah. I think it's cooler, the mystery of being.
Yeah, it helps me understand.
And Heidegger, when he talks about this, he just says being. But you have to understand that whenever he says being, he's talking about the mystery. And it's the foundation of all of his... It's the only thing he's ever talking about, guys. This is the only thing Heidegger is ever talking about. And if you understand that, his philosophy becomes a lot less confusing. Because in the first video, when Jasmine asked, is it about what's actually there versus what's just in our heads? Like, pi exists in our heads, it's an idea, but it doesn't actually exist. And you have to remember that Heidegger, this is unanswered. What exists versus does not exist, and what does that even mean, is unanswered. So you can't use the word actually, because that's biased. You're saying that things we observe in observable reality, imperfect circles, you're putting that first, ahead of the idea. And we don't even have, it's like Heidegger would ask, what's your basis for doing that? And the basis is materialism. We're very materialist in America and in like Anglo society, like the Anglosphere is very, very materialist. That's why we consider ourselves no more than our bodies, you know, like death is permanent, because what you can observe and define and measure is all there is, according to materialism and atheism. Does that make sense, Jasmine?
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds pretty accurate.
So, in reality, Heidegger would say that both pi and imperfect wheels exist, but we don't have a way of putting one of those existences as a higher over the other yet, because we haven't done enough philosophy and really understood what's actually going on. We haven't answered this question.
Okay.
So we don't know what exists versus does not exist. Now, I want to do another side thing so that we can draw the relationships here. And I'll put borders around this stuff. So Parmenides. Everything exists. And the way that I phrase that, this is what I mean when I say being is universal. So Parmenides would say that pink elephants dancing around in top hats exists. Ants, like intelligent, like anything you can imagine, anything at all, everything exists because being is infinite.
Me and Parmenides vibe.
Yeah, me and Parmenides vibe too. That's why me and Jasmine vibe. You have this kind of idea like that since you don't have a basis for saying what exists versus does not exist, we don't know. All we can say is that some things exist for sure. We've guaranteed that some things exist. But according to Heidegger, we haven't even done that. We haven't even done that. Because all we know is how things appear. That's all we know is how things appear. And not even how things appear, but how things appear when they are observed by us, taking a measurement. So you have to understand that that's a limitation too. Because you can't, it's hard to know. It's like, you have to take a measurement. So you have to change something. You have to do something in order to see what's actually there. So I want to go into... I can continue with Heidegger's philosophy here.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Would Heidegger say, like, this mouse pad doesn't exist?
He would say that there is no basis for putting this mouse pad's existence over the existence of a dancing pink elephant. Because all we know about this mouse pad is that we can see it and touch it and feel it and observe it. But it could be the Matrix, for example. It exists, but you can't put its existence first by using terms like actually or really or any of that, because we don't know what reality is.
So then wouldn't Parmenides be like, yeah, bro, I agree with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Parmenides, and that's why Heidegger loved Parmenides, and I just bought a book on Heidegger. I bought Heidegger's book on Parmenides, so I'm going to be reading that. The Parmenides Platonic dialogue is considered the hardest dialogue because it's very, because it's about this. It's about trying to prove the universality of being with philosophy.
Wait, so is Heidegger trying to, like, put things in a hierarchy? Oh, no, he's saying you can't put things in a hierarchy.
Yes, he's saying you can't, but then he does. I'm gonna talk about the hierarchy you can build. So you can't put things in a hierarchy, except you can, in Heidegger's opinion. Because this is why, guys, and this is, it's not a line, it's an arrow. These were like sidelines. Here, let me just put up some borders here. I'm sure there's a more efficient, faster way to do this with some kind of keyboard wizardry, but I don't know. I don't do Google drawings often, or Google anything. Ah! So, the mystery of being. It seems like we can't get anywhere besides pure solipsism, right? Like, oh, well, that's all we've got is the mystery of being. Like, we don't know if anything can exist because we have these elephants. We have all of our imagination. Parmenides, it's like we have all of our imagination and then we have what we can observe, but we don't even know if it's the Matrix or not. It could all be the Matrix. So we can't know anything. Right? That's what solipsism means, is that you can't know anything. And so you're just like, I don't know. This could all be fake, man. I don't know. Nothing's real. Nothing's real. Do you see, Jasmine, how you can kind of start to go towards the thing of nothing's real if you don't have any grounding?
But even if it was the Matrix, what makes it not real? Because if it is the Matrix is real, so why wouldn't the things that exist inside them also be real?
Exactly. That's why I love Heidegger, is because he goes underneath to the fundamental existence instead of just worrying about, okay, so it's a representation. But what we don't know for sure is whether or not what we observe is like a priority. So we know that we can't see pink elephants because it doesn't make sense for them to be pink. Now, does that mean that pink elephants don't exist anywhere? Does that mean that a real elephant, a scientific elephant, is, more real? And that's where you can wonder about the Matrix, because that's where you can think, well, maybe we don't know what it's like outside of the Matrix. But if this isn't the Matrix and this reality is all there is, then that means that all of reality is subject in some way to the fundamental force of physics. And you can't have pink elephants dancing around in top hats because that wouldn't make sense. And so I think that with science in an infinite universe, if this universe is flat and infinite, and that means that every possible ordering of atoms occurs an infinite amount of times, because the observable universe, there's an infinite amount of them, and it just goes on forever. If that's the case, then being is universal only in regards to physics, as far as I'm concerned. Because for me, I do want things to be... I want existence... in order to say something exists, I want it to really exist. And what do I even mean by that? I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know. I want it to be real. You know what I mean, Jasmine? I want love to be real, not just some imaginary concept. You know?
I feel like, I don't know, everything's real in some way, even if it is an imaginary concept. That doesn't make it not real. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you do know that you're starting to get Heidegger, and but what you realize though is that the reason why Heidegger gets confusing is because we're so used to putting material things first, because we live in a scientific age, a technological age, and technology is the area. Aristotle called it technology. It's the same word. Aristotle would have called it technologos, technology, something like that. So that forces you to care very much more about the material world than about imaginary things, because you have to make the car go. Well, we can't think about Cinderella's carriage anymore, because we need the car to actually move. So screw Santa Claus and screw Cinderella, we're going to make an engine. And when you live in a society that's like all about economics and the elimination of poverty and technology, you just start to think biased. You start to become a materialist. And that's not fair. It's not fair to say that ideas are lesser. So I want to talk about now, I want to go into how Heidegger moves from here. And this is what I wrote my senior thesis on, is where Heidegger goes from here, but only the early Heidegger. So I want to explain, guys. When Aristotle was younger, when he first started being a professor in like the early 1920s, he taught Aristotle, but he taught Aristotle in a way that was like really very much his own philosophy and his own interpretation. And then later he got like enough of he became like grown up enough basically to write his own magnum opus, Being in Time. But a lot of the same themes, I feel like Heidegger took his interpretation of Aristotle, incorporated all of it. I don't think he rejects any Aristotle, and then builds on it. So we're used to Plato. Plato had two different categories for being in the common conception, right? There's the real circle and then imperfect circles that we can actually draw. So there's this circle. When you draw a circle, this circle represents pi, a perfect circle, especially in the computer's mathematics. That's how my computer is drawing this, right? It's just doing an equidistant line from the central point. But that's just a definition. So when we have an imperfect circle like this, you can still make this a representation of the perfect circle. You just have to define it as one. So you just say, okay, it's warped by 5-to-1 dimension. That's what the computer is doing too, is just scaling it. So Heidegger has Heidegger has 4 rather than 2. And I'm not going to go into I'm only going to go into 2 of them.
2 what?
They're called being characters, but 2 bases for knowing that things exist. Or basically, okay, sorry, Jasmine. 4 ways that things can exist. So how can things exist? Well, there's 4 ways, but I want to only talk about 2 of them. Because the first 2, like, everything's in ancient Greek, okay? So all this stuff is in ancient Greek. So their words, the way that their words pertain to reality were completely different. They really were. So when they say perfect circle, when they say real circle, when they say this, when they say that, it's all in ancient Greek. And Aristotle and Plato, like, they saw the world different. They just did. So their words don't mean the same thing. It's like trying to talk to a Buddhist monk or something who's really into that. Like, their words mean different things. So I'm only going to talk about 2, okay? Let's just make it less confusing before I talk more. From the human experience. From the human experience, guys. You don't have to know anything. This is Heidegger's I think therefore I am, but me and Heidegger and Nietzsche, we all make fun of that because it's not true. So Descartes had the I think therefore I am. We kind of make fun of that because it's not true. You can think. It's like, okay, so a schizophrenic doesn't exist because they can't think straight? No, that's not how it works. It's not because you think. You can dream too. You can dream. What about that? Existence is deeper than just thinking. There's more to it. This is supposed to be an arrow. Also. The perfect circle. Okay? I put it in a perfect circle because... Definition. We can define things. We can define pi. I can define it to you. There's things that exist only in relation to other people, like your language, right? Like English. English doesn't exist if there's only one person in the universe. But even if there was only one person in the whole universe, they could define pi. So it has a different type of existence than a language. That makes sense, right, Jasmine?
Yeah.
Because a language only exists in relation to other people.
Yeah, I get that part, but it's if only one person existed in the world, could they define pi?
Yeah, it's a perfectly good question. It's such a good question, guys. This is what Plato and Heidegger, this is what they thought about. People think it's so like esoteric and convoluted. It's not. They're thinking about something that's really interesting and basic. Okay, could a random guy in the forest, could he figure out math? Or is it more related to just a language? Is math fake? Like, just like English? And you know? Who knows? But we do know for sure, guys, Heidegger takes it for granted that we can indeed define things. Because he's writing being in time. So it's like, well, this whole freaking book wouldn't make sense. All I'm doing is defining. And from there, I want to give... Wait, where did it go? Hey. I assume the circle is just in front. Better be. No. Oh, it's because the text box is like in the circle, it seems like. Okay. Definition. Aristotle's word for definition was, well, man, I forgot the exact word. Okay, so from definition, you get science, language. Well, you get language, logic, science. But science also depends on measurement and passage of time. So for science, you need two things. You need the passage of time so that you can take a measurement. And then you need language. You need definition. The existence. So this is the realm that science pertains to, guys. That's why science can't say anything about, anything that's like in our heads, like fiction, like Game of Thrones or something. Like science can't tell you who the like whether or not the maesters are this and that, because it's all made up. It's fictional, but it's still defined. So language, you can describe Game of Thrones, the fictional Game of Thrones universe, with language. You can also describe logic, like what Russell did and logicians do. And then after you do that, you can finally define science if you allow for the passage of time and the taking of a measurement. Whereas language doesn't need any of these things. Language is its own thing. So you have to realize, guys, these arrows are just if the drawing was bigger. So language leads to logic, which leads to science. The passage of time, guys. The passage of time is its own thing. Remember being and time? I think, therefore I am. No. I experience time, therefore I am. Imagine if you never experienced time, you couldn't think. So the passage of time comes before thinking. It's the first thing that happens. That makes sense, right? Like it's the first condition that has to be satisfied.
Is it the actual passage of time or the feeling?
The experience. The experience.
Well,
we experience time passing.
I feel like there are like what are they called? Sensory deprivation chambers. You don't experience the passing of time. It passes. You don't feel it. I don't think.
You would, because you're still going moment to moment in your world. Like whenever you have a thought, it has to have some kind of temporal grounding. Well, this would be the kind of argument that you could have. You would ask that in class, and it would be like, well, can you have being without time?
I mean, your cells experience the passage of time, so
yeah,
that's like the base. Then yes, your cells will always experience that.
And thus your brain, and thus your mind.
But like the conscious part of your mind doesn't necessarily. Your brain, the neurons, the cells that make up your brain, yes, and they have. But
everything that is you is ordered in some way temporally. If it wasn't, like, I feel like schizophrenia, as that one schizophrenia lecture, I can link it again down below, but like that, what happens is they lose their ability to categorize things in a temporal order. And so I guess they don't experience the passage of time. Yeah, so we don't, but okay, so maybe instead of saying time's ordered passage, temporal ordering, some kind of temporal ordering. Otherwise, because whenever you do anything at all, you need some kind of temporal ordering in order to think or have an action. Things need to be in front of or after.
I agree with that.
And the Greek language isn't like that. The ancient Greek language. So they didn't care about the ordering of things as much. Because of that, in a way, in my opinion. So anyways, Heidegger considered the passage of time to be very fundamental to the human experience. So if sensory deprivation tank or a schizophrenic, like your journey from birth to death. That's what he well, here guys, sorry. I was wrong. It's not the passage of time. It's death.
Oh yeah, isn't he the one who says you have to go through life knowing you're gonna die?
Knowing you're gonna die. Being oriented towards death. Because part of the human experience, this is what you can't deny is death, guys, because you're gonna have the heat death of the universe. So in my science fiction, they're trying to get as close to the heat death of the universe as they can and survive that long. But it's trillions and trillions of years. It's no matter how long you live, you are going to die because you're anti-entropic, because you're alive. You have care. So care actually comes before. Oh no, death comes first. Since you are indeed going to die, that's what forces you to temporally order things, because you're going to die. So you have to care about the right now, the here and now, versus the later, because you're not going to be alive for the later. So you have to care about 2021 more than 30,021, because you're not going to be around in 30,021. So from death, we get the passage of time, guys. From death, we get care. Care, concern. Because you're going to die, you have to care about things. You have to care about time, and you have to care about whether or not things last forever. Well, am I going to keep going after I die? Is there an afterlife? You now care about these things. Because you kind of have to. You more than kind of have to. If you want to be authentic. But Heidegger says most people just ignore it. Most people just pretend like they're never going to die, and then they just never think about it. Because it's more comfortable. And then from care and concern too, guys, this is what the first video was about. That's where guilt and conscience come from. So Heidegger puts it before even thinking. Before you even think about anything, you can feel guilty. Because you can hurt yourself. And you can bring about your death sooner. You care about that. So we're going to take a break here, guys, because this is already like a pretty nicely long video, and then this will be part 2, why Heidegger isn't confusing. So I hope that this helps a little bit. This kind of chart, you can pause it. When we do part 3, this will be more this chart will look nicer, and then we'll keep going. We'll keep going all the way down to the bottom. Being in time, guys, the whole book, the reason why I say he never finishes it is because he doesn't get much farther than this. He doesn't get that much farther down this tree. And this tree is the whole project. He really doesn't get that much farther down. You actually need something in between care and concern. You need to experience the world. So you need the passage of time for a guilt and conscience also. So this should actually go like this. Because otherwise it would be, you need causality. How can you feel guilty about doing something if there's no causality? You know, like I did this and this happened. So yeah, we're going to stop here. Heidegger chart. Well, let's do Logan's understanding of Heidegger chart. Logan's hopefully not shitty understanding of. And I will make sure that I have a professor look over all this and let me know if I'm vibing or not. But I know I am, like, at least enough, because, you know, I I care about this guy a lot. I care about his philosophy a lot. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.